Thank you for listening to the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays. I'm here with Jay Jones, and this is Text Driven Tuesday.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
Good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Enjoy that game?
It was pretty good. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, we had a good time.
Did you think that the Chiefs were going to lose?
I did. Yeah, I thought they were going to pull it out. Yep. But they didn't.
Did you see any good commercials? Anything that you were like, this is fantastic?
Nothing really strikes me, I guess. I mean, they were entertaining ones, but nothing really blew my socks off.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought the Baja Blast one was, I don't know that it was like groundbreaking, but I thought that's effective marketing.
Which one was that?
It's one of them where they kept saying we're having a blast. They were doing like random things, and they were like, I'm having a blast too. And they had a Baja Blast in their hand.
I may have missed that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think, effective.
Mm.
So that one, maybe.
Yeah. I thought the Dunkin' Donuts one with Ben Affleck was.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty funny.
I forgot about that one. Yeah. I didn't get it, though. What's the name of the drink? They're naming a drink after us.
I have no idea.
Are they naming a drink, or is it just a Dunkin'
know.
Donuts commercial? Just a Dunkin' Donuts commercial?
I don't know. I thought that one was pretty funny.
Huh. Is Dunkin' Donuts like a Boston thing?
I don't know. I don't know.
Matt Damon definitely is showing some age in that.
Yeah.
Yeah. His old buddy.
Yeah. Well, they're getting up there.
Yeah. True. Didn't see what happened afterward. Was there like a Taylor Swift event on the field, or
I
what?
have no idea.
Yeah, we left. Started driving home in the blizzard.
I saw people were telling her that she needs to get away from him quick after his yelling at the coach and pushing him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, he pushed the guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to see like the whole thing. Like the heat.
I don't know. I mean, it seems like you wouldn't like scream in your coach's face.
Yeah.
I mean, that just seems like obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like something you wouldn't do, but I don't know what they are like behind the scenes, or they may have a relationship where they like yell at each other.
Maybe.
It's already established.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I have no clue.
Yeah. Yeah.
They call him Mr. Pfizer.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Did you see the Pfizer commercial? Are we going to get banned for me saying Pfizer?
Probably.
Did you see the Pfizer commercial?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Gonna take on cancer.
Never forget.
Yeah. It's a good way to repair your image. We're gonna take on cancer.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then we had the He Gets Us commercials that were pretty gay.
Yeah, I didn't even see it. I just saw, of course, the Twitter aftermath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were pretty bad.
How many were there?
There was 2 that I saw.
A lot of money. Was that 17
million?
million? 17 million?
It's a lot of money.
7 million for a short commercial? Something like that?
Something like that. Where's that money coming from, Jay? My wife was looking it up, and she said that their big donor is Hobby Lobby.
Huh. Okay.
So, you remember a couple of years ago that Ed Stetzer tried to sneak it into the SBC. You remember that?
He Gets Us stuff?
When the SBC was like partnering with them.
Oh, yeah.
And then who was it? Was it Tom Buck that exposed them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Bet you all the money in my bank account, Jay, that the SBC still gives money to them.
They probably do. Yeah, no. It's all a show. The annual meeting.
There's
It just
there
continues
there's
on it,
some
yeah.
there. I'm sure that there's some sneaky money. I saw that the even the description of the group that he gets this group
Uh-huh.
talks about there's people in the group that aren't Christians.
That's odd. Yeah, that's odd. Huh.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, the most important thing about the Super Bowl being over is that we can focus on baseball now.
Yeah,
Jay. So
it's here.
baseball is what 2 weeks? 2 weeks before pitchers and catchers.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already started for college guys.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you can go out and watch college baseball right now. Yep.
That's all that's important, Jay. That's all that's important. Well, we are back in Romans. I had to watch it on my phone yesterday. I wasn't
Yeah,
feeling very
You
well.
weren't looking
so.
good. You weren't looking good either. Brick said you looked green in Sunday school. Yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Yeah. You were showing.
Okay. All right. Well, I tried to stay away from people, but yeah, I came to Sunday school and then left. So
Yeah.
had to listen on my phone.
Did you watch it on? Did you watch it on the app?
I watched it on the app.
How'd it work?
It was fine. Yeah. It's not really intuitive. Like you have to go to the calendar,
Mm.
and that's where the live feed is. It's not
Gotcha.
like on the main screen.
Ah.
So I had to poke around a little bit to see where it was.
Okay.
But once I found it, it popped right up.
Yeah.
And it worked fine.
Oh.
Couldn't get it to work on my Roku. I was gonna watch it on my TV, but there was no place to watch live. So it was a little disappointing. But yeah, you were in Romans chapter 1, verses 8 through 15.
Yes.
Probably a passage that people don't really spend a lot of time on. They probably just read it and just move on. I mean, you've got 16 and 17 right there. And so people really focus on verses 16 and 17
Mm-hmm.
and probably not a whole lot on Paul's greetings.
Right.
But you brought out some things in this text that help us to understand how we ought to live. Paul, you mentioned, and it's good for us to. I mean, people are always saying, "Well, Paul ain't Jesus."
Yeah.
Like we don't have to listen to Paul like we would to Jesus because he's not Jesus.
Right.
And you said, of course, of course, Paul isn't Jesus.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we can't emulate Paul.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Paul even says, "Follow me as I follow Christ."
Mm-hmm.
So we can see from how Paul is writing to the Romans, we can see what he's like, and we can try to imitate that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. That's the idea.
You use the opening illustration of the stethoscope.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know they had a digital one.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it was. I went to this VA appointment, which VA healthcare has gotten a lot better. Almost feel bad for like the Vietnam veterans because they had to like be mistreated and have terrible health care, so that we can finally have some measure of. I mean, it's not like if you go to the civilian doctor, really, unless they like outsource you for something, but just your regular appointment. But yeah, so I go in there and there's no doctor in there, and the nurse is like, "This is a telemedicine visit." I'm like, "Okay," like okay, well, where's this lady at? She's in Oklahoma City. So screen pops up. She's on there. You know, they had already taken my blood, so she's doing all the readouts to me over the thing, and then the lady's like, "Okay, it's time for her to listen to your heart and your lungs," and she pulls out a stethoscope, but it's digital, and it's like linked into the computer.
Interesting.
And so the lady put some headphones on. She got some headphones, and she sat there like this, with their eyes shut, and listened.
Yeah,
It was interesting.
it is.
Yeah.
But you drew the contrast. You said, as a stethoscope listens to your heart, we
Uh-huh.
can read these. We can read Paul's words, and we can get a kind of a window into his heart.
Yeah. So that's the idea is we can make some observations and ask ourselves what it reveals to us about this man.
Mhm.
So he's someone worth emulating or trying to imitate, as he really is kind of like a model Christian. Not everyone is an apostle, but everyone is a follower of Christ. And so the idea was, let's make 3 observations about Paul, someone who's really been gripped by the gospel in their life.
Okay. All right. So that's your outline. 3 observations of a heart that's gripped by the gospel.
Yep.
So let's have you read it, and then we'll look at those 3 observations.
Okay. Romans 1, beginning verse 8. First, I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is proclaimed in all the world. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing you I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow by God's will I may now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish, so I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome.
All right. So 3 observations that we see here in these verses. The first one is a heart given to invocation. And as soon as I
Indeed.
heard you say that, I thought, you're going to do an alliteration, aren't you,
Oh,
Jay?
yeah.
This is an alliteration outline.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what is an invocation?
Invocation is just prayer. It's a prayer.
Okay.
Think of it as invoking. You're invoking God for something.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So
a prayer.
So verse 8, this is a prayer,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so his heart is given to prayer. That's
Yeah.
what Paul. I mean, this is common for Paul
Mm-hmm.
all throughout his letters.
Oh, yeah.
He just breaks out into random prayers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And 10 of the 13 letters start like this, with a prayer similar to this. So, yeah, I mean, this is the way he begins. First, I thank my God in all remembrance of you. And so I think that reveals to us somebody who has been changed and transformed by the gospel. They before probably did not pray, but then now they find themselves thankful and people of prayer, that their heart is given over to it naturally. So that's kind of this idea that we see. First off, that we should observe the frequency at which he is doing it in all of his letters. Kind of shows us this is kind of as his heart is inclined to this. So he's inclined to often be in prayer and to be thankful. I think if someone who understands the gospel and what God has really done for them in Jesus Christ becomes thankful, they become a thankful person. That's expressed in thanks and thanksgiving to God for what God has done.
You mentioned that you couldn't remember where it was, where prayer is likened to breathing.
Did you find the actual quote?
Oh yeah, it's J.C. Ryle.
Okay,
It's J.C.
there we
Ryle
go.
called Prayer. J.C. Ryle.
Yeah.
You can. I pulled it up. I googled it really fast, but you can get these little pamphlets. Yeah, he says, all children of God on earth are alike in this respect. From the moment there is any life and reality about their religion, they pray. Just as the first sign of life in an infant when born into the world is the act of breathing, so the first act of men and women when they are born again is praying. And then this is the famous quote. He says, the first act of faith will be to speak to God. Faith is to the soul what life is to the body. Prayer is to faith what breath is to life. How a man can live and not breathe is past my comprehension, and how a man can believe and not pray is past my comprehension too.
Yeah, it's good. It's a little short book. Yeah.
And it's probably just a little sermon.
Yeah. Yeah, so he begins to pray, but I think also we should take notice of the personal nature of this prayer, my God. That is, as I said, it's not like saying, my president. Like we can all say my president because he's kind of our president, but it's something different in a personal sense. Not that as if you own the person, but more in the familial sense. And he's already called God our Father in the beginning of this book. So taken into that context of our Father, my God, we see this very personal aspect to the prayer that I think only belongs to Christians. And the reason we are able to pray like that is what he says next, through Jesus Christ. So he is the medium or the mediator by which we can approach God in this way, in this very personal relational sense. And I think we should never lose that aspect that we have. We serve a Trinitarian God, and the only real way we have access to God is through the second person. 1 Timothy 2:5 says, "There is one God, and there is one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus." And that's how we go to God. One time I remember I had a friend who was a very devout Catholic, and so I went with him. He's like, "You should just come and observe, what we do." So I went with them to observe their lunchtime mass, and he's like, "Yeah, he's my priest. He's awesome. You can ask him any questions you have." And so I was like, "Okay, well, what question do I ask a priest who obviously don't agree with many things on?" And I thought this was one that could maybe, of course, they have an answer to it. So I just ask, "How is it that you say there are other mediators between God and man? The priest, Mary,
The other saints."
And then I quoted this verse to him, 1 Timothy 2:5. "There is one God, and there is one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus." And, of course, they have their answers that come from tradition, not from the Bible, as to why this could be. But there you have it in black and white. There's one God, one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. So Paul's prayers, he's given over to prayer, but the way he prays is to his God, who he knows intimately, through a mediator, through Jesus Christ. And so I think we should take note of that, and we ought to keep that always in our minds as we approach God. And we don't, in our own right, just because of who we are, get to approach God. But we can obey Hebrews, which tells us to boldly approach God, the throne of grace, because we stand in the righteousness of the second person. So that's kind of...
And that helps us to understand the privilege that we have to pray.
Mm-hmm.
We often, and we'll get into this in the in your third point, but we know that we are supposed to pray, and and we still struggle. I mean, I still struggle to pray because you're just surrounded by so many distractions. But one of the things that we can remember is that this is not just some lifeless duty that we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we'll talk about this in the third point, but it's a privilege. It's a privilege for us to pray. Christ has died so that we can approach the throne of grace.
Mm-hmm. Right. And the exclusive privilege that it is.
Right.
This is not, and it obviously this would not be politically correct to say, but no one on earth just gets to go to God whenever they want, or offer their prayers as if God will listen to them. Of course, God hears everything because He's God. So, but that doesn't mean that you have direct access to Him. I think it's really pretty arrogant to think about the mind of someone who is not a Christian, who thinks that they just have, because of right of being born
Right.
into the world, that they can just go to God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, God is described in the Bible as so holy, and His presence so like mighty and glorious that beings that we would probably say in the spiritual realm, the greatest beings, so like archangel type seraphim, the top class, they can't even be in His presence without hiding themselves. So they have 6 wings and they hide their faces with 2 of them, and they cover the rest of their body and they're down to their feet with the other 2.
Mm.
And we think that we can just go before Him.
Mm. He dwells in
Unapproachable
light.
Yeah. But we do get to go to Him through Jesus, the second person. He's our mediator. He takes us to Him,
Mm-hmm.
gives us the right to go to Him. And we don't even, and what's amazing is we don't really go to Him as timid, scared people going before like some emperor, despot.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus teaches us to pray to our Father.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very different
Yeah.
dynamic now that's taking place. Yeah.
Right. So we can be thankful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's not just thankful in a personal way, but he's thankful on behalf of others.
Right. Yeah. So you can see, I mean, he says it because of your faith is proclaimed in all the world. So he's thankful for other Christians. Again, and these are even Christians he doesn't know personally. But the faith of the Romans is, and you shouldn't take this in a literal sense, not every single person on planet Earth has heard of the faith of the Romans, and not even every person in the Roman Empire. But it's a way of saying, like, pretty much in the known world, which is the Roman world, that in a lot of the places that Paul has gone, they know about the faith of the Romans, that there is a collection of saints in the heart of the Roman Empire, which is really remarkable to think about, that this could start with a group of blue-collar nobodies, in persecuted people who are commanded not to tell this message of the gospel in Jerusalem, and now it's spread from Jerusalem all the way to the Roman Empire, and there are Christians there, likely because there were Romans there during Pentecost. That's probably what happened. There were citizens from Rome there. They heard the gospel at the day of Pentecost, and they took that back to Rome. Though we can't be certain that is how it happened, but nevertheless, it has happened. And as far as we know at this point, no apostle has gone to Rome yet. So
yeah,
it's very interesting to think about. And and so he's thankful for these Christians, and this marks Paul's prayer in most of his letters: Colossians, Philippians, Thessalonians, Timothy. He's thankful for, and he tells them, "I pray, and I am continually thankful for you and your faith."
Yeah.
And I think that is encouraging, and we can identify that to a degree. You know, we had Dennis Gunderson came in and he gave that presentation to our church, and there are Christians. We saw Christians on screen of this previously unreached people group as early as like the 1950s. No one had ever taken the gospel there, and now there are many churches there, small churches. These people live a very humble life. They live in like what we would call shacks,
Right.
with no running water or electricity, and yet they're gathering together in these different churches in these small villages, and they're Christians, like they're our brothers and sisters. And so when you see those presentations, you can't help but be thankful, like that God, you know, it's amazing to think about how, I don't want people to like struggle with this, but how insignificant like our individual lives and ministries are in God's grand scheme of things He's doing in the world. Like, God is taking His gospel all of these places, and we didn't do it. And like Paul, he didn't plant this church, but yet we see how thankful he is that there are Christians there.
Right.
And there's a strange bond there that I think is captured very eloquently in a small sentence by John Murray, and in his commentary on Romans. He says the bond of Christian fellowship is not limited to the circle described by personal acquaintance. And that hits it right there.
Yeah.
The bond of Christian fellowship, it transcends people or Christians that you personally know. And yet you still have this bond with them. And so there's the prayer of thanksgiving that he offers continually on their behalf for their faith. Yeah.
So there's thanksgiving, but there's also supplication or making a request to God. So there's different elements to this life of prayer.
Right. So now he begins to ask God. He's asking God for something when he's really telling the Romans what he prays when he prays for them. He calls God as a witness so that they know. Paul's not just, he's not just flattering us here. Like he hasn't come here. Maybe they had heard that, hey, Paul, wait till Paul comes. He'll really be encouraged. And he wants them to know that he does, and he has wanted to come, and he has been praying continually without ceasing every time he mentions them, asking that somehow, by God's will, he will finally come to Rome. So that's his prayer that he's asking. He's continually asking that, and so far, hasn't happened yet.
Right.
So, but that's still, nevertheless, his request. The frequency of his prayer, I think, is something to take note of too. It's as if it's continually something that's before him.
Right. Yeah, his heart is pouring out in prayer, and but he also wants to be conformed to the will of God. He's understanding,
right,
that God's not a genie,
right.
He doesn't get just wishes granted by God,
right,
and God's not. I think this is also contrary to the way that like Word of Faith people will talk about prayer. Like it's not just if you are sowing a seed, God will do this. Paul, don't you know that if you just tithe, that God will will bless you and you can get what you want,
or if you declare it.
Yeah,
actually, I had a young couple, church members. They came up and asked me about this very thing. They said, we know people who are really into this declaring like stuff. What's this about? They'll declare things like over their children, over their house, like, declare away like the bad spirits or whatever, or declare like blessing and prosperity.
Right.
And I said, well, I can only speculate, but the declaring stuff is really, I think, an American invention. And I think my thinking is that it came into Americanized, we'll say, shallow Christianity through Eastern religions, which have this component of the power of positive thinking. You can manifest reality for yourself by your mind, and even that words have power. So there's really that, and then it kind of reeks of old school paganism, honestly.
Yeah.
Like the pagans believed, even in the Roman world at this time, you could go to, you wanted to invoke, who knows, what do you want? Maybe you want a baby. Who do you go see for that? Artemis of the Ephesians, maybe. And so you go there, and the priest can open a scroll up like this and hold it in front of your face. And if you say all of the words, it'd be a long thing for you to say, by the way, many words. But if you say all of the words correctly, then the deity is obligated now to grant your wish. So you're declaring, your words carry power to invoke what you want to manifest in reality. And of course, that type of stuff has gone on all throughout paganism. But you can, and pretty much what I said, it was like, look, just read through the New Testament. You'll never get a whiff of it. You'll never even get a hint that we've been given the authority to declare things for ourselves, right? Even if you want to say, I declare under the authority of someone who belongs to Jesus that We don't see that. Otherwise, wouldn't we see Paul like speaking like this in all of his prayers?
Right.
But he doesn't. He just
No.
says he has continually been praying and making this request to God, and so far it's not been granted.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, don't be pulled into the sick form of American Christianity that mixes in paganistic ideas.
Well, even in the Roman Catholic Church, you've got some of this
Yeah.
with the Rosary, praying through the Lord's Prayer
Right.
with the beads. You go to confession, the priest tells you, like, say this many Our Fathers, this many Hail Marys.
Yeah, and then you'll be absolved.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
That's simply not the way that we are called to pray. We pray to our Father, our God, through Jesus, through what He's done for us, and according to His will.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is a reminder that Paul has a heart for prayer. He has a heart for invocation.
Yeah.
And we ought to also.
Yes.
It also ought to be part of us. It should be like breathing.
Right.
Right. All right. But the second one is a heart of holy ambitions. Heart of holy ambitions. And I know you were wondering whether you should use this word or not.
Yeah, I almost didn't use the word ambition because I think culturally, just where we are and the way our language is used here, it carries kind of a negative thing. Like the first thing I think of when I think of ambition is like a politician.
Well, I tutor some kids and we read some Shakespeare plays, and one of the ideas that keeps popping up in these plays is ambition. So Julius Caesar, Macbeth, and we got this line from Brutus: "As Caesar loved me, I weep for him. As he was fortunate, I rejoice at it. As he was valiant, I honor him. But as he was ambitious, I slew him." So the reason why Brutus says that he assassinated Caesar is because he was ambitious. And I think that's how a lot of people hear that word. They hear it. It's just like Macbeth. Have you read Macbeth? You know the story of Macbeth?
No.
Oh, Jay.
Haven't. Never have.
Just lose a little bit of the esteem that I have for you whenever you say things like that, Jay.
Well, we did some Shakespeare in high school, but there's a pretty good chance I wasn't paying attention.
Yeah. Right.
At all. Yeah, zero.
Well, Macbeth, he assassinates the king, and it's because he's ambitious. He wants to be the king. So, yeah, I think that you're right. Like, politicians are ambitious.
Yeah.
So we hear that word, ambition, and I think we immediately have a negative angle to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that, though.
No. Yeah, ambitions can be good and right and noble, you know. We like to read and think about those missionaries who've taken the gospel. I had mentioned already Patton to the New Hebrides, but you think about like William Carey, like take the gospel to India. You're trying to break into a place that's never been. You don't know the language. Like that's a lofty ambition, but is it a good one? I would argue yes. There are good and right and holy ambitions that we can have as Christians, and it doesn't just have to be like. Maybe you are called to be a missionary, or maybe you are called to be a pastor. Those are good ambitions, but think about just like your regular everyday Christians. How many of them have started things in their towns, like to take care of homeless people or to take care of orphans or you name it? I mean, that started somewhere. It started as an idea, a goal, started as an ambition that they had to then work toward to see that come into reality. And I think we see that in Paul. Paul has an ambition. He's made it known that one of his ambitions, one of the things he's resolved and set his heart to do is to go to Rome. But I think you can also read through Acts and see that Paul's not just someone who's like flying by the seat of his pants, like going wherever the wind takes him.
Right.
he has a goal to, it would seem, if you look at his missionary journeys and where he goes, to go to influential cities in certain regions, either maybe they're cultural centers or political centers. And he's going to those places to plant churches. And then when that's done, he'll move on to the next one. So I think it's pretty safe to say, and we can see here of his intention to come to Rome, that he is a person that has ambitions. He is driven by ambition. And it's a good and right thing. And it's something worth emulating.
Yeah, there's what Paul calls selfish ambition. I think James says selfish ambition also in maybe James chapter 4. But there's also holy ambition. And it's easy to just kind of coast through the Christian life. Just kind of, like you said, just go wherever the wind blows you.
Yeah.
And just kind of, float through life with no aims and no goals. But what Paul is showing us here is that Christians should have ambition. They should have some goals that they want to accomplish.
Yeah. I mean, think about the way he talks about running a race. I press on to make it my own, not that I've already made it my own. I press on toward the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. You couldn't say that's a man coasting through life.
Right.
Ever. But we easily can fall into that. Like maybe we get into a good spot in our life with work and family and even in church, and then we can just kind of set the cruise control and just cruise through life comfortably. Not to say that anything's wrong with seasons like that, but I think Christians ought to set some goals in their lives. Everyday regular Christians. One of those could be to read the Bible, the whole Bible.
Yeah.
You got to start there. That would be your most basic, I would think. First goal, ambition. I think everyone should have that goal. There are a lot you could think about. Reading books. I never really read books until I became a Christian, and then I started reading books. So, maybe you're curious about some theology or something, and grab 2 or 3 books. Make that your goal that year, is that you're going to read these books and really digest that. I think a good ambition to have is to have someone in particular in mind to share the gospel with. And you pray for that person, and if you keep that before yourself as a goal or a good, right ambition, you're probably going to do it. It'll probably happen. So maybe after that, you maybe add another or set a number of people you'd like to share the gospel with in a year. I think one that's a good one that younger generations really need to get. There's a lot of dynamics going on financially in America today that are kind of against younger generations. But our parents and their parents, they prioritize their finances in a way that they were able to give to missions and to ministries. So we have this church here was not built by our generation of people. Like we've been blessed and handed down to us from other generations of people. And so I think when you look in all churches, even what we would say healthy churches, is majority of the giving is done by people of older generations. The younger generations, granted, they are at a disadvantage where at one time one household income in that generation really equals 2 in ours, which is these are the cards we're dealt. But there was a time early in our marriage where we weren't giving to the church, and so after I was converted, and so we had to sit down. We had a meeting, and we were like, look, we're going to have to make adjustments in our life because we need to be participating in the ministry financially. We have the ability to do it if we take certain steps that maybe will make us uncomfortable for a while until we get our finances adjusted to where that's even a possibility. So maybe we have to pay off some certain things, some debt, and then we can make that happen. So that's a good ambition. It's not selfish in any way, but to continue to give to the work of ministries, not just maybe where you're at, but also to ministries in other parts of the world. Like we have, it's pretty humbling to think about the people group we're going to be helping and giving missions to now as a church. A pastor there can live off $500 a month.
Yeah.
That's everything he needs. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
So you can support a whole pastor with $500 a month. That's amazing. So that's a worthy thing to adjust your finances for, I would say.
Right.
So I think a challenging thing is forgiving. I was I'll talk to Drake just a second about this because their pastor up there, he was preaching about forgiveness. But it's the most unnatural human thing, I think, to forgive somebody. To forgive somebody. It's the exact opposite of everything in our human nature. And yet we're called to forgive it as Christ has forgiven us. So if you have a problem with forgiving people, like where do you start? Well, you want to start with making that an ambition, making that a goal. And then that's going to be in your mind, like more than it would. And I think as the more you meditate on how you've been forgiven in Christ, then because of this resolve now you have, then you can be more forgiving. Yeah.
Yeah, there's another word for ambition is resolution. And we can kind of scoff at resolutions because people make New Year's resolutions. They're gonna, they're gonna exercise more. They're gonna lose weight, or whatever. And by the second week of January, they haven't.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that resolutions are bad. That just means that the way people go about them is very temporary.
Right.
A good place for us to go and see somebody that makes resolutions and he's adamant it's his ambition to live this way is Jonathan Edwards. And you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Jonathan Edwards and his resolutions.
Are there 65?
There's 70.
Okay.
There's 70.
I knew there were a lot.
Yeah, there's 70 of them. Yeah. And it's easy to read those and get discouraged.
Right.
Remember, you're not Jonathan Edwards. He's like the most brilliant person that America has ever produced, both theologically and philosophically and probably scientifically. So don't get discouraged when you realize that you don't you're not Jonathan Edwards, but you can just you can just find these online. Just look at the resolutions of Jonathan Edwards and just look at what his ambitions were, and see that he did not just write these on December 31st and then tuck them away in a drawer and forget about them. He was constantly coming back to them and reading them and evaluating his life and determining, am I living this way or not?
Right.
And that's the only way that you're going to make this kind of resolution work, this kind of ambition work. And that's the thing with Paul. What is he doing? He, without ceasing, he's praying for the Romans. It's always before him, so that his ambition to come to them is always something that he wants to do because he's constantly praying for them. An ambition is not a one-time decision that you make. An ambition is something that you are constantly coming back to, and you've got to persevere in accomplishing it. You have to evaluate whether you're like, how are you living up to it? Do you need to make some changes in order to accomplish this better, or are you doing what you set out to do? So, looking at Jonathan Edwards' resolutions helps us to see someone that he's very adamant about keeping these,
right,
and he's ambitious to live this way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then this is most successful people in the world, even non-Christians. This is kind of how they live. So if you were to go grab a book on living a successful, prosperous life, those guys, the guys that do that, high achievers, like they're not just coasting through life. They've got a set of goals. They're looking at them. They're evaluating, making plans to meet them, and they're living intentionally in that way. And I think, for Christians, we ought to live with that same type of level of intentionality when it comes to our life and our ambitions. They shouldn't be selfish ambitions. many Christians have hid what we would see as a good, right ambition, but underneath it is a selfish ambition. But we should have ambitions that we're shooting for.
Right.
And one I think I would love to see more people do is, start Bible studies that are very informal and casual with people in their lives that they don't go to church anywhere. They're not Christians. Maybe outright they say that, or they're westernized, Christianized, like secular Christians in name only. Like, have a Bible study where people like that can come and you just have time to hang out. And we've seen over the past 8 years only a couple have done that, but many people have become Christians through that and become members of churches. So I think that's a good goal to have, and anyone can do it. Anybody can do that. If you're a Christian, you're equipped to do it. You have your Bible, you're equipped to do it. You may not have all the answers, and that's okay, because you really don't have to have all of the answers. So you can go find out, but just doing it, having those relationships open and kind of seeing that as a way you can have a ministry. But if it's never an ambition or a goal for you, it's definitely never going to happen,
So you're not just going to accidentally fall backwards into leading a Bible study
right
in your house.
Yeah.
But his ambition, we also see within this ambition to come to the Romans, this desire for mutual encouragement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he specifies he wants to come to impart some spiritual blessing to strengthen them. I think it's a very bad interpretation, is that because the apostles never gone there, they have no spiritual gifts, which I find to be interesting, because if they're Christians, they have the Holy Spirit. So I don't know where they would get this idea that you must get a spiritual gift from an apostle. But some have said that. But he specifies, so you don't have to wonder. He's not speaking about some supernatural giftings. Mm-hmm. He tells you, if you just keep reading, that is, meaning he's explaining, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. And there it is. Mutual encouragement. The medium of the mutual encouragement is the faith that they share in common, faith in Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And so they don't know each other, but really they're spiritual brothers and sisters through the blood of Christ. And I think anyone who's been a Christian for a while understands this. They've experienced it in their own life, that when Christians get together, whether they're Christians you've known for a long time or people you've only just met, there's a supernatural, organic thing that happens, and we can't test it by the scientific method, right? They're not going to do any psychological studies on this because there's not going to be anything to probe and to prove. But the Holy Spirit, produces this mutual encouragement in believers because of their one faith that they share with each other. So, even the most hardcore introvert that's ever lived, if they make their way to Bible study, they leave feeling better than they came, even though they may feel tired. We've talked about this. Like, if you be around people enough and you're an introvert, it kind of makes you tired. Mm-hmm. That's maybe true, but still, you feel encouraged and you feel better about the world, better about your life, more positive. It's a supernatural thing.
I can testify to this because I have to, I guess, force myself sometimes to do like visits, to go visit people.
Okay.
Or even to we often have meetings with people that are visiting. Uh-huh. And sometimes it's something I have to I really don't want to do this because I'm an introvert. I'm that guy that it wears me out to talk to people. Mm. And so sometimes I have to force myself to do it. I cannot tell you a single time that I've done it that I've come away saying, "Man, that was a waste of time. I wish I hadn't done that." I always come away feeling encouraged, and that helps with the next time.
Mm-hmm.
To when my feelings are telling me one thing, I can talk to myself and remind myself, like, this is always encouraging. It's always for the good. It's always
Mm-hmm.
I always come away glad that I did it.
Right.
And so you don't listen to your introvertedness.
Right.
You do.
Yeah.
Remember things like this. Yeah, it's encouraging to be around other believers.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. So that's what it is. Paul, he's got these ambitions, but we also observe that even though he's praying, it's a right ambition. It's good, noble ambition. We have to take note that thus far he's been prevented. That's what he says in verse 13. But thus far I've been prevented in order that I might reap some harvest among you as well as the rest of the Gentiles. So who is preventing, right? That we should always ask this question. And so I think we see clearly that the understanding of the apostles is that God's providence permeates everything in the world. So what pagans would ascribe to chance or luck doesn't exist for the Christian. It's God's providential guiding of what we would call circumstances and affairs and things. And Paul's been prevented apparently so that he can take the gospel to all these other places. Seems to be what God's doing in the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, you can see even God directly intervening to guide him places. Like he'll be prevented from going to Asia, so he'll go to this other city. And then, in Acts 16, he gets a vision of a man in Macedonia calling him to come over here and to preach the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes there, sensing that God is guiding him there. So there's direct intervention, but, there's also circumstances completely out of our control that are providential.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a shipwreck. I was shipwrecked and stranded
Right.
for a while. So all of these different things going on in Paul's life, I think he sees and understands that his what he wants to see happen hasn't happened yet, and that's okay.
I think that tempers his ambition also.
Yeah.
Like his ambition is to spread the gospel. And you see in Acts 16 how he's like, that's his ambition. His ambition is to preach the gospel where it hasn't been preached. And so he keeps trying to, let's go this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And he's hindered from doing it. Let's go to this direction. He's hindered from doing this.
Right.
Until God, in his providence and sovereignty, tells him where he should go.
Yeah.
Like God, he allows God to direct his ambition. He's not being selfishly ambitious.
Yeah. So we can obviously conclude from this the same thing's going to happen in our life, probably. You probably can set out and make a list of good goals, ambitions to strive for, to pray for, and they may not happen. But that doesn't mean they're not going to happen, or when they happen, that they're going to happen the way you think they're going to happen. Like all of those things are there. Because Paul does go to Rome eventually, but he goes in chains.
Yeah.
So goal met, ambition met. I've arrived.
Yeah.
Anyone want to come visit me
Plot
and Joe?
twist. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that should be an encouragement to us. That shouldn't be a discouragement.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So yeah, that's kind of the idea there.
Yeah.
To live ambitiously.
Right. All right. So a heart given to invocation, a heart given to holy ambitions, and now a heart under obligation.
Yeah. You can blame this one for doing the alliteration.
Okay.
I am under obligation.
So you took this one and you're like, all right.
Yeah. I am under obligation. So he
Okay.
says in verse 14. He says it plainly. So there it is.
Okay.
A heart under obligation.
All right. What is an obligation?
Well, it means that you're morally or legally bound to do something.
Okay.
Or you could say a duty. Duty would capture that in one word.
Okay.
The literal Greek translation, if you're just going to go like, what is a definition from this word? It means to be a debtor, to owe a debt.
Okay. So he's under obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish.
Uh-huh.
All right. So he's under obligation. You said he's under obligation to Christ
Mm-hmm.
for what Christ has done for him.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's obligated to obey.
Right.
But he's also obligated to those who haven't heard the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
which
Right.
that the Greeks are pretty much anyone in the Roman Empire that's a Gentile. Right?
Yeah.
And
Like
then,
a civilized person.
and then the barbarians are like the Germanic tribes.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're a non-Greek speaker, so Latin is kind of like in the empire a legal thing, but the empire it's I mean, we can see it in our mind.
It's English.
Yeah, it's the Greek-speaking world has that culture of Alexander the Great. It's spread through, and the
Right.
Romans expanded it, and that's a civilized person. That's a Greek.
Right.
Barbarian is what we know as a barbarian.
Right.
It's, yeah, the tribe, the unconquered tribes. Yeah,
To the wise and to the foolish, to everybody.
to everyone.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's under obligation to everybody to preach the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound too fun, Jay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Like we talked about this, like duty.
Yeah.
It doesn't this does not spark joy. You remember that lady?
No.
The minimalist
Uh-uh.
who told people to get rid of all their books.
Oh, really?
This does not spark joy. We talk about obligation, we talk about duty. And this is where people jump in and they say, Jay, don't you realize that Christianity is a relationship and not a religion?
Right.
Duty and obligation sounds like religion to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have to grapple with it.
The word is there.
It's right there, staring at the face.
Uh-huh.
What I found also in Romans 15, he uses same language, but he's speaking about an obligation or debt that Christians owe to the saints in Jerusalem. So he's collecting an offering among the Gentile churches that he's planted to take back to Jerusalem to the poor saints, to the poor Christians. Right? This isn't just a general welfare. This is for the church in Jerusalem. And in Romans 15:24, he says they were pleased to do it. That is to give their finances, and indeed they owe it to them. That's pretty wild to think about. They owe it to them, people they've never met, they've never had any interaction with. He says, for if the Gentiles have come to share in the spiritual blessings, they ought to also be in service to them in their material blessings. So, again, words of the apostle. There's somehow a debt owed to those who need to be cared for if we have the means to care for them, another Christian. We shouldn't see it as an optional thing. So
Right.
picture you're in your church even with people you know, right? There maybe you've got wealthier people in your church. You've got people that struggle financially. Maybe they're out of a job. They can't pay their rent. Well, I think we would be inclined to say, would you make a goodwill offering if the Lord leads you? Or I think Paul might say, you're under obligation to take care of this person. That's different.
Yeah.
That's very different.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to grapple with it. It's there. I mean, it's his duty language.
Right. And you brought up Piper,
Right.
because Piper does not like the word duty.
No, he does not. Didn't he? Who was the guy who preached right before him at the conference? The guy who went to jail, who was part of Watergate scandal, all that, and then went to jail, became a
Chuck
Christian.
Colson?
Chuck Colson, yeah.
Chuck
He
Colson.
like preached right before
Mm-hmm.
Piper. This was when Piper was in the days of Desiring God was coming a thing,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, everything he said was wrong. Because I guess he was talking about duty, maybe. I don't really know. And he goes into talking about the joy and pleasure, the pleasures of God, pleasure in God,
Right.
as he does, as is his thesis.
Right.
So
And you gave the illustration that he gave of buying his wife
yeah,
what flowers.
yeah, yeah, roses for Noel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's in his book. He definitely has preached it before, but it may be in the book Desiring God. So the thesis of his ministry is that God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Christian hedonism. You seek for ultimate joy. Ultimate joy is found in God. So, and when your joy is in God, then everything kind of flows from that. And so he really doesn't like duty. And this illustration captures it. It's a masterful illustration. Even if I disagree with it to an extent.
Right.
I don't totally disagree with it. I think it's very good in like marriage advice. So it's like his 49th wedding anniversary, and he goes and buys $200 like bundle of roses, bouquet of roses. And instead of going in his house and just walking in and being like, happy anniversary, he stands at the door and rings the doorbell, and he hides the roses behind his back. And Noelle comes to the door, and she's like, opens the door. He takes the roses out, and he's like, happy anniversary, Noelle. And she's like, oh, Johnny, like, why did you go to such expense? Why did you do this? And he says, now imagine if I said, it was my duty. It's my duty. Maybe I should try this out. My anniversary's coming up.
You think so?
Wait. Yeah. Valentine's is coming up. There we go.
Do you know when your anniversary is, Jay?
Valentine's is coming up
Pop
this week.
quiz.
I get double. What is the ringing of the door? Do you hear this?
Yeah, I hear it. Let me go take care of it.
Okay, I'll continue the illustration. So duty. So I got to get back on track now. Why did you do this? It was my duty. And he's like, that obviously wouldn't go anywhere. Like, it'd be probably a bad anniversary. But he says, what I say is what anyone would say because I love you. Right? I love you. You're, my joy. It's a pleasure to be your husband. Your work, all of this, what you would expect.
Yeah. I wonder what he thinks the reason is for wedding vows.
Yeah.
Like here.
Well, that's
like so what he's doing is he's making this false dilemma between duty and delight.
right.
I am obligated to take care of my wife.
Right.
I am obligated. I've made a wedding vow to love her. Like I swore before God and before everyone in the church that I would love her. Right. So I am obligated to love her.
Mm-hmm.
I'm obligated to take care of my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I can't just not feed them or clothe them. I am obligated to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But just because I'm obligated to do something doesn't mean that I don't have joy and delight in doing the duty. Right?
But so also I thought about this. There could be a time where in a marriage, and this is a hard one for me to wrap my head around because I've never been in this situation, but perhaps your marriage isn't doing well. Mm-hmm. And the affections aren't there. Mm-hmm. What are you to do? Just going to be a bad husband? Like,
right.
Divorce your wife?
That's what most people do.
Yeah. But like if you're a Christian,
mm-hmm. right,
even when your affections aren't there, mm-hmm. the duty remains.
Right.
And so the duty can keep you in obedience. And then from what I hear from people who've been married a really long time, usually your affections will catch back up.
Right.
You've gone through a bad season.
Yeah, the problem is people are often led by their emotions. And we've talked about this before, that emotions are terrible leaders. They're better followers. Mm-hmm. And so people they live like they're slaves to their emotions. and what we see in the scriptures and what we can testify into in our own lives is that love and joy are deeper than just your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
You can have love for someone even when you don't have some kind of warm feeling of butterflies.
Right.
You can have joy. Paul is a great example of it. Jesus is the superior example of him having joy.
Mm-hmm.
He went to the cross because of the joy that was set before him.
Right. Yeah.
He didn't feel. I think we equate joy with happiness. I don't think he was feeling in the moment what we would call happiness,
Mm-hmm.
but joy is deeper than that.
Yeah.
Love is deeper than that. And so, like you said, duty will drive us where emotions won't.
Mm-hmm.
Emotions will only push us so far because once the emotions are gone, the drive is gone.
Right.
But duty will take us to places where our emotions fail.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't think, when people do things that are death defying on behalf of other people, even whether you think maybe they're policemen or firemen running into a burning building, it's not because they may not even know the person, have any affections for the person.
Mm-hmm.
They're not running in there out of love.
Right.
They're running in there to fulfill their duty.
Mm-hmm.
And so duty can propel you. And I have to think in Paul's life, there were times where he wanted to stop. He's a human. Like, we
Right.
can't look at Paul and say he's like the second coming of Jesus, like a
Right.
different person. He's just a person empowered by the Spirit. But you can't tell me after he was like stoned to death, he didn't think of, or they tried to stone him to death. He survived, that he didn't think about quitting. So he had to go back and count the cost again.
Yeah.
And then come to this realization, as he will appeal to the Corinthians to flee sexual immorality. He was bought with a price. The most, I almost want to use the word ridiculous. There's not even a word to capture the reality in one word of Jesus Christ dying on behalf of a mere mortal, a sinner who doesn't deserve it. But Paul understands that. And I have to think that in his darkest times, that we aren't told about them, but they were there, especially maybe when he was starving to death,
You go into the synagogue. His heart is for his people. They should have received their Messiah, and they reject him, and they'll stone him, or they'll raise up the Gentiles against them, or chase him out of town, and then he goes to another town, and they chase him out of that town too. I mean, discouragement is just right there, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, but he's duty bound.
Mm-hmm.
He must fulfill his obligations to God. He's bought with a price, but also to his fellow man. It's part of, if you can also think of this obligation that he's under to take the gospel. You can work to it in a logical sense, right? To the command to love your neighbor as yourself, or even the commands, what Christ would say in the Gospels: "If you love me, you'll obey my commands." So there are people, our neighbors, all over the world. Right? That's kind of the idea: is that everyone is your neighbor, for the Christian at least. We're not talking about who lives next door to you; it's your fellow man. To love them, how do you love them? We're commanded to do that. There are people who have never heard the gospel, right? There are those people in the world. So if you love your neighbor as yourself, you're obligated to take the gospel to them. Mm-hmm. And we have the only message of salvation. It's exclusive. There's no other name under heaven given among men by which we can be saved. And so and you can get into his mind, Greeks are barbarians. I would love to have a story of Paul going to the barbarians. Did he ever get to? Did he ever make that trek? We aren't told. The gospel obviously did go to them eventually, but he sees that as his duty, and I think it is able to propel him at least until his emotions can catch back up.
Right.
So that's kind of the idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that was good.
Thank you.
It's a good sermon.
Yeah.
So
One more, and then a break, and you'll be in Malachi.
okay, so you're going to do 16 and 17. This
Yeah.
is I mean, we're kind of gone in a circle because you
Kind of,
started
yeah.
you started with an overview, and this
Yeah.
is the thesis of the book, right?
Yeah.
So we'll be back in it.
Mm-hmm.
Haven't you already preached this sermon?
I preached. What was it? There were 4 reasons to not be ashamed of the gospel,
Mhm.
I think, and so
Yeah.
this one will kind of look at because it's kind of the theme of the letter. Kind of the
Mhm.
same things that are said in these few sentences are expanded upon. One of which I think people don't often think about is if we say God is just God, how can a just God pardon a sinner?
Mm. Yep.
And so there's a question that's left there. And it's really answered. It's answered here in the text and also it's elaborated on
Right.
through the rest of Romans.
But this is these 2 verses change the world.
Yeah.
So
They did.
that'd be good. All right. Well, one more, and then we'll be in Malachi. And,
Indeed.
That'll be fun.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
cue the music.
Cue the music. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully, this has been beneficial and encouraging for you as we've looked at these 3 3 truths that we've seen from Paul's heart. May it also be a reality in our own hearts. If it has been helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, share, download the Christ Fellowship Church of Lawton app, and you can find past podcasts and sermons on there. And I guess we'll see you on Friday for another Free for All Friday. We'll look at another abused and misused verse. Until then, have a good week. God bless.